Hey, welcome back. Sam here from Pick Up Goliath, back with the next part in this mixing series where we're mixing this track from beginning to end, and I'm showing you every single step in my process. In the last session we were looking at getting our drum mix up and running. We did some really nice things, including some parallel compression and some drum replacement to get that kit sounding really nice. Today we're going to be jumping into guitars and focusing on guitars. So let's look at that bass guitar first and foremost, and particularly let's explore the relationship between the kick drum and the bass drum, because that is so important, right? So let's just refresh our memory. Where have we got to with this mix? This is the drums as we had them sounding. Sounding beautiful, nice and fat, meaty, and then we put the bass guitar in context with that, and what have we got? Cool, so to my ear, I'm hearing actually not too bad a bass tone. It's a little bit flat, it's a little bit lifeless. It's just sort of pleasant, but nothing particularly special. It's a bit inconsistent in the dynamic, and particularly in that low end, we want it to be nice and solid and consistent, so we need to work on that. And we need to make sure that the two things, the kick and the bass in our low end, aren't masking each other. So we'll think about how we're going to do that too. So first things first, I'm just going to, and I can do this in isolation because I want to hear exactly what it is I'm cutting out. I'm going to cut out the lows and the highs from this sound, the bits that I don't want to hear. And what you should hear, really, is that it's not a noticeable difference. Because if it's a noticeable difference, then what you're doing is you're removing sound that you could actually be benefiting from. All I've done here is to trim these two parts in. Whoops. Trim these two parts in using this little headphone icon that lets me hear what it is that I'm cutting out. So I'm rolling off around 50 Hertz in the low end just to get rid of some of that sort of mud and rumble and thickness. And in the high end, I'm actually quite low. I'm around 4K. But as you can hear, there's nothing but a little bit of click and nastiness above that anyway in this signal, which I don't want. Bit of click and a bit of fret buzz. So that's all good stuff, just starting to cut out some gumph that I don't want to hear. Then I'm compressing a little bit. So I'm using this FET style vintage compressor, and not really aggressive, about a 4:1 ratio. So I guess I'm looking for about 3 to 5 dB of gain reduction, just starting to bring this in check. Yeah, just around 3 to 5 dB of gain reduction, particularly on the pokier hits. And you can see I've got a relatively fast attack and release. So what I'm trying to target here is the transients predominantly. I'm trying to tame the transients in to stop them poking out quite as much. That's what I'm going for here. So relatively fast attack release. Not too aggressive on the threshold, about 4:1. And then I'm also using some of the distortion in this compressor just to start getting a little bit more saturation, a few more harmonics into this bass sound, which will help a number of things. It'll help in terms of it translating on different systems. It'll help it on smaller systems, so if you're listening on a phone, for example, which is all good, right? Then I'm bringing up, and I absolutely love this, Slate Digital's Virtual Mix Rack. So I'm doing something pretty, tell you what, let's add these things in one at a time into our chain. So the first thing that I'm doing here is I'm actually trimming it in a lot, and that's because I want to drive it through this preamp quite significantly to get a lot of saturation out of it. So I'm getting lots of colour and kind of distortion, really. So I'm trimming it up by almost 15 dB so that I can then get a nice amount of saturation out of it. But then after this chain, I'll then trim it back down again so that I'm gain staging it within this chain here. So let's listen to what I'm doing here. Would help if I turned the whole rack on, wouldn't it? So a nice sort of thickness, a nice warmth coming from this saturation. It's not sort of obviously distorted, but it's just giving us some girth and some meat. Then I've got some EQ going on. So I'm looking to boost a little bit with the shelf around sort of 80 hertz, something like that. High passing again at 50. And I'm also boosting around, I guess, 3K-ish to give me a little bit more presence, a bit more bite. Then I'm compressing again, so compressing in series, multiple levels of compression. Again, not too aggressively. Attack is sort of a moderate attack. Slow release, so I'm looking to control more of the overall body of the sound. And how much gain reduction am I doing on here? Again, 3 to 5 up to about 7, so I'm not going super aggressive, I'm just slowly bringing this sound into check. And then I'm gain staging it back down, so I'm trimming it afterwards so it's back in line with what I had in the first place. So all the way through, gain stage, gain stage, gain stage. Now, next up in this chain, I'm using CLA, the bass rig from Waves. I absolutely love this. Now, people get a bit funny about using things like this that sort of do a lot of the work for you and using presets and stuff. Look, I'm not a massive advocate of just slapping on a preset and saying, thanks very much, away we go. But I am an advocate of saying, use a preset, intelligently select a preset, and then tweak it, you know, to suit your purposes. In this case, I'm saying, look, what I want is to get more distortion out of the top end. So I'm using the bark mode in the top end and boosting that with some distortion. I'm then saying I want some more compression. So I'm using the compression built in to this plugin to push it. I'm not going really hard, so I'm not using the spank or the sort of brick wall compression here. I'm not using the sub at all. I've turned that off. And then I'm distorting again with the growl function here. So I'm not going really hard with the raw or the rip, but just a bit more distortion and, you know, and really just using the tone. I'm not pushing that at all. And again, trimming, so trimming the in, trimming the out. This plugin in particular is really hot. But just listen to the difference that this makes in terms of the overall tone that I get. It's that bite, it's that sort of presence that's going to help it be part of the mix and not just be a sort of a thick gargle that is there that you don't really know what it is. Just makes a massive, massive difference. And if we A-B that in context with the drums even, it's the sort of the fret sound, it's the bite, and just really helps it to be part of that mix. Love that. The next thing that I've got going on here, another Waves plugin. This is Bass Rider. Now, I love Bass Rider. I love Vocal Rider, which I'll be using later on in my mix. Absolutely love this. Because it basically allows it to ride the levels. So without having to squash it again with another compressor, I'm able to basically set a target level, and then Bass Rider will, dependent on the sensitivity that you've put in this plugin, it'll basically automate the fader so that it's riding the signal. time it's looking at what's going on in that bass part and it's saying that bit's a little bit quieter, let's just boost that. Oh, that bit's a little bit louder, let's bring that back in check. So it's sort of doing the job of a compressor, if you like, but without sucking the life more out of the part. I still want it to sound like a performance, like there's a person playing it, because there is. But I want it to have that extra level of consistency because I want the bottom end to be really solid. And this is a great way of doing that without having to slam it again with more compression. So I love that. The next thing that I've got going on here is I've got 2 EQ plugins, and I put one on my bass, and then I've got one over here on my kick. Now, what I'm doing with these 2 things is I'm basically using them to reference each other and to tell me or help me to dial in each sound so I can hear them both clearly, and they've both got a place to sit in my mix. So what I've done is to actually set a sidechain input from one to the other. So on my kick, my sidechain input is set to my bass channel, and vice versa. On my bass channel, my sidechain input is set to my kick, so they can both hear each other and see what's going on. So if I play this track, you'll see a second sort of signal, which is the waveform of the other sound being represented in each plugin. So the white line is on the left, the kick, with the red line the bass, and vice versa on the right. The white line is the bass with the red the kick. Now, what I've basically done, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll turn all these moves off, and then we'll reintroduce them one at a time so that we can see what I've done here to shape the tone, because I did this in advance, so it'll be good to remind myself. Now, let's look at the kick first of all, shall we? So first thing I've done on the kick looks like a high pass. Around 50 hertz, just to tuck in some of that sort of sub bloom that I don't think is appropriate for this genre, for this style of music. I want it to be a tighter sound. I don't want that real thickness in the bottom. And likewise with the bass, looks like I've done a similar thing. So just tucking in under that 50 hertz sort of mark. Now, what I've had to figure out is what I want to be most present. So what's going to be the lower sound and what's going to sit higher. And it looks like, in terms of analysing these EQ moves, I've identified that I want the bass sound to be the lower sound, and I want the kick to be higher than that in terms of the frequencies that I'm going to target. So in my bass, I've boosted around 60 hertz here, but conversely, in my kick, I've cut that frequency. So I'm making space for that sound to come through in my kick and boosting it in the bass. So let's put both those moves on and see what difference that makes. Subtle, but it's helping that bass come through. Now, what I've actually used on my kick channel here is I've used a dynamic EQ. So what it's doing is to analyse the information that's coming in from the bass and say, I'm actually only going to duck that frequency when the bass is there and playing. When it's not, that frequency can come back in the kick. So I'm not permanently scooping 60 hertz out of a kick, which would be the obvious thing to do. What I'm saying is, when the bass has that frequency in it, scoop it out. Otherwise, let it be. And therefore, you'll see this sort of ducking and dipping as appropriate. Nice. Conversely, I've targeted around 85-90 hertz on the kick. I've boosted that, and I'm applying the same principle with a dynamic cut in my bass. And that actually, this dynamic cut in the bass makes a massive difference to help that kick come through. If we A-B that, that's like all of the punch of the kick coming right there in that little band. Huge, massive difference. Love that. Now, looks like I'm scooping out a bunch of mid-range. The likely reason I've done that is because that's what I'm going to target with my rhythm guitars and where I want my rhythm guitars to be most prominent. So I don't want to be using up that space in the bass guitar. Then I'm high passing, again, just around that same frequency that I targeted in the first high pass, just in case anything is snuck in there. Barely audible. And then I'm scooping some of these sort of high mid frequencies. But then boosting a bit more of the bite and attack. Now, it'll be really important that what I do is to check all that stuff with my VU meter, as I did in the first instance, to make sure that I've still got that balance that I had. So let's just have a little check, see where we are. Nice. Love that. Sounds great to me. So there we go. Kick and bass locked in. How about that? Beautiful. Let's take a look at these guitars then, shall we? Nice. Okay, so what I've done is to route my 4 rhythm tracks to a new rhythm bus, which is then going back into my guitar bus, and likewise my 4 lead tracks into a new lead bus, which is going back into my guitar bus, giving me an extra little bit of, I guess, control at each stage of the process. So let's just take off any processing that I've done here. And let's reintroduce these things a bit at a time. In fact, let's mute the lead entirely. Let's bring in that rhythm guitar first of all. Cool, okay, not too bad. First thing I've done is just cut the lows and highs, just roll off the lows and highs. Not particularly aggressively. I'm about 100 hertz, and I've done those each individually, so it's not one size fits all. They're all slightly different. That's not going to make a massive difference to what we hear now, but just it's just tidying things up. Then I'm just processing all these 4 guitars as one. What I don't want to do is start sucking the life out of them individually, because that's going to make it sound less like a human performance, and I still want it to sound human. That's a taste thing. So first thing I'm doing, therefore, is I'm actually applying some EQ and then some compression and then trimming those things in. So let's listen to what that is doing. So it's giving me brightness and crunch, and it's also making the dynamic more consistent with this compressor, so it's more balanced in the mix, which I love. Again, I told you I loved it. I used it on the bass. This time I'm using CLA's guitar plugin, and similarly dialing in the things that I want to hear. So I've got some bite going on. I'm going quite hard with the compressor, but then I'm actually pulling back the overall sort of level of that. And then I'm putting on some reverb and delay within this plugin, and also a little bit of stereo widening. So let's just hear A being this plugin in isolation, so you can hear what that's bringing to this sound. So definitely helping the width, definitely giving it a bit more thickness and, funnily enough, chubbiness, because that's the preset that I use as my starting point. A bit more chubbiness, but that's doing some great things for me. I'm then thinking I need to hear this more distorted because it's a bit too clean for my liking. So I'm going with this grit distortion pedal that comes as stock with Logic Pro. You're probably thinking, whoa, that sounds nasty, but it's all about context. And at the moment, way too much, for sure. But let's trim it. And then let's apply some more EQ moves. So I'm going to cut lots of that harshness, focus on that 500 hertz band that I said I was going to be looking at, and then cut some more lows. Sounds good to me. Now, I've got set up 2 aux sends within my guitar's bus, which I've set up on 13 and 14. I've labelled them as delay and reverb. I'm not actually using any delay on my rhythm guitar, but I am using this reverb. I'm using Valhalla's Supermassive, and I'm using the EQ trims within it, so that I'm cutting the low end from the EQ section and the highs, so that I'm not getting a big build up in those areas. That's a really great tip. And then that's sort of coming in the mix here. Now what I'm also doing is on my guitar bus as a whole, I'm then further gluing these things together. So I'm using this lovely bus compressor from it's IK Multimedia, their T-Rack suite, which is a beautiful, beautiful load of plugins, real nice emulation. And I'm using this to, again, glue those guitar elements together a bit more. So let's stick this on here. Not really aggressive, but it's these little stages that slowly pull things in and in and in that are all going to add up to a nicely balanced mix. So I'm getting about 3 dB of compression, no more. Nice and subtle. Now, I'm going to come on to that because that comes in later on with the vocals. Similar story on the lead guitar. So I'm applying my EQ moves on each individual channel, and then I am EQ compression and trimming. So let's add these things in one at a time. So that compressor in particular is doing a massive load of work for us. It's really making that part more consistent, bringing out each individual note. Another instance of CLA's guitar, very different things going on here to the previous one. So again, distortion, compression, reverb, but much more delay. And then I'm pulling back the width. I don't want it to be big and wide in particular. That delay is really, really important to this sound. More distortion coming. Then I'm compressing. So FET compression, vintage FET compression. Slow attack and release, so I'm looking to just smooth the body, More distortion coming in the compression plugin itself. And that's really leveling this sound. It's making it very, very consistent. Then I'm trimming with the gain so that I'm bringing it back down, so I'm gain staging. And then I've got what looks like some wacky EQ moves, but I've sidechained it, so I'm looking at the input of the rhythm guitars. Which, likewise, I reckon I've done... Oh no, my rhythm is sidechained to my bass, and my lead is sidechained to my rhythm. How about that? Let's look at both my guitars. So, my lead guitar here, I'm rolling off 130. So a little bit higher than I did on my rhythm. I'm pulling out that sort of area that I've targeted in my rhythm guitar. So I'm targeting 500 in my rhythm, but I'm ducking that in my lead. Little presence boost, but then I'm cutting out lots of that sort of high-end fizz, which is where I'm going to be targeting the vocals. Cool. Let's put that in context. And then, sorry, I forgot to mention, I've got more delay, so really going hard on the delay on this lead. I've got an 1/8 delay on the left and a 1/4 on the right. I'm using the ping pong, so it's going to be giving me this jumping backwards and forwards feel. But I'm using the roll-off, the filters quite aggressively. So I'm filtering up at, I don't know, whatever that is, about 400 hertz, and then low passing as well around, I guess, that's about 5-6K, something like that as well. Using the colour to brighten that up afterwards, narrowing the pan, so that I'm really, controlling that sound. I don't want it to just go crazy with delay, but I do want it to, again, use that to sort of enrich and thicken up this sound. And then that same reverb that I used on my rhythm, which is, again, going to put them in the same place and help them belong together. So let's A/B all of those moves that I've made. So let's take all of that off. This is where we started this session. So much better. It's quite bitey, it's got a bit of aggression, it's got more energy now for sure, particularly in those guitars. The guitars before were just a bit limp and lifeless. It's definitely got more energy going on. It's more consistent, balanced, dynamic. And what I can do is to, obviously I was doing this as I was going along, but reference that back and forth with the Paramore track, just to hear what's going on. What you're going to be checking for there as you A/B is the kick sitting the same in the mix? Is the snare hitting the same in the mix? Are the overheads the same? Is the bass tone, frequency, dynamic, consistency the same? What about the guitars? So as you A/B, you'll listen to each of those elements one at a time, focusing on it and going, is that sounding similar? Is that sounding right? Is that sounding like it's doing the right thing in my mix? That's the whole purpose of A/B-ing. biggest tonal difference that I'm hearing is between the snares, but actually I prefer the snare tone on mine. It's a bit cleaner, it's less roomy, and it's a bit more tight, and I prefer that. Cool. So there we go. That's this session wrapped up. Next session, we're going to be jumping into those vocals, and we're getting close to a full mix now. So vocals next, BVs as well, and then in the last session, we'll be looking to finalise this mix and master it. So I hope you've enjoyed this one. Make sure you hit like, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Any questions you've got for me, stick them down in the comments section, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks very much.